Tom Clancy, mystery.
What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol.
This is one of those times. Joining me here in the Washington studio, a familiar name, a familiar face, best-selling author of so many novels, Tom Clancy, mysteries, at the heart, Tom Clancy, of the military community, the intelligence community. People in our newsroom have been saying today what's happening is like right out of a Tom Clancy novel, but could you possibly imagine something like this to write about?
Now, one of the problems with being a writer of fiction is that you can't keep up with all the madmen in the world as much as you try.
You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol.
And I frankly would have thought that this was not a credible threat to have 4 separate people decide to commit suicide in the same way on the same morning.
Why not?
Because ending your own life is not something the average person does. You know, everybody's assuming these are Islamic terrorists. Well, if so, they've defiled their own religion. You know, Islam does not permit suicide. It says you go to hell if you do something like this.
But we see suicide bombings in the Middle East and in Israel. And
Judy, we saw people in Northern Ireland, Catholics acting like savages and Protestants acting like savages. So anyhow, we have people who call themselves Muslims acting like savages. It happens. It's not because of their religion. It's because they're fools.
What does this say now? I mean, you've done a lot of reporting. I mean, you not only write fiction, you do a lot of reporting from inside the intelligence community, inside the military community. What does this say about how prepared we are as a country?
Well, people always ask that kind of a question when things go wrong, but you don't ask the question when things go right, and the reason is you can't tell when things go right in that business. Well, one of the things I've been saying for a lot of years is that we need to upgrade the human capability, human intelligence capabilities in CIA and the rest of our intelligence community, because you can do a lot with satellites, you can do a lot with eavesdropping techniques, but you can't find out what's in a person's mind except by talking to that person. And so the agency needs to increase its human intelligence capability. The CIA has about 20,000 employees, less than 1,000 of whom are actually field intelligence officers. That number should be at least doubled. But you know, America as a nation doesn't love our intelligence community. And certainly the news media does not love our intelligence community.
I'm going to interrupt you, Tom Clancy. I'm told Aaron Brown in New York has a development. Aaron?
Well, Judy, just in the last few seconds, another building, we will speculate carefully here that there was building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Those of you who have been with us for a while, you can see indeed that the smoke color has changed has gotten much lighter. So we believe that yet another building, this would be the 3rd building, has collapsed, likely building number 7. Although we also heard that there were problems at building number 5, and it's possible that one went down too. But again, another building in the Trade Center complex appears now to have caved in after these attacks. Judy?
Aaron, we're looking at these pictures, Tom Clancy and I, as we sit here in the Washington studio, and just as I come back to Tom Clancy, I want to read just a portion of a statement issued by Secretary of State Powell, Colin Powell, calling these attacks a terrible tragedy befallen not just my nation, but all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, all those who believe in democracy. Tom Clancy, you were saying, sure, we can ask these questions about failed security, failed intelligence when things go wrong, but we have every right to ask these questions, don't we?
Well, no, first, remember, you have a right to say anything you want, but as a practical matter, one of the things we have to do, if you want to prevent things like this from happening, is you build up your defenses. And your first line of defense against terrorism is an intelligence gathering capability. Now, when was the last time CNN or the news media in general said, gee, we ought to put more money into the human intelligence capabilities of the CIA? Answer, you never do it. Never.
Well, we wouldn't take a side on something like that. Anyway, in terms of what do you fund and...
Yeah, we always take a side on saying they failed. Why not help them succeed once in a while?
Are you saying that they are significantly underfunded in that area? And not just the CIA, but the FBI?
Human intelligence is de-emphasized. The FBI's job is...
Spying is what we're talking about
Yeah,
here.
that's what intelligence officers do, is they spy. And the CIA has 20,000 employees, about 800 of whom are actually spooks. And of them, maybe as many as 2/3 actually get outside and do spook operations.
And we know that...
And we need to do better than that. We need to do more than that. You gather information of this type by putting people out on the street, same way cops gather information from informants. This isn't rocket science. It's just a matter of hiring the people and letting them do the work.
But I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron, but my question is, how do you know what to believe? We had an Arab journalist in London just today saying, we had this information a few weeks ago, it was coming, we didn't know whether to believe it. Now back to Aaron in New York.
Thank you. We've talked a number of times today about the fact that it is simply too dangerous for officials to get in and around these buildings. It's so very, very dangerous, and the proof of that just a few moments ago when another building in the complex that is the World Trade Center, or was the World Trade Center, collapsed. Maureen, we can show you what that looked like. These are taped pictures taken literally just a few moments ago. When that building went down, we are seeing them for the first time. This is, correct me in the booth, but I believe that was, in fact, a piece of tape that we got just a bit ago of the second plane hitting the South Tower of the Trade Center just a little bit after 9 o'clock this morning. Again, a third building at the Trade Center has collapsed within the last 3 or 4 minutes. Building number 7, this is no small building, as you can see, at 47 stories. It would stand out in most American cities. It looks small, I guess, when you look at what was the 100-plus stories of the World Trade Center, but building number 7, it's 40-plus stories, almost 50 stories, collapsing as well. And if we can go back to the tape and see it one more time, and I'll look at it with you. Again, this occurred just in the last several moments around the Trade Center building. Building number 7, 47 stories. Maureen Madden, CNN producer, is in the area. Maureen, what can you tell us? What did you see?
Well, about 2 minutes ago, we happened to see 7 World Trade Center go down, which holds the Office of Emergency Management for the City of New York on the 23rd floor there. When we heard from the fire department of NYPD, is that the whole south part of the building was engulfed in flames at one point, and it was a matter of time to collapse. They were just waiting for it to collapse, which we've been waiting for about a half hour. When it went down, it was quick, it was quiet, and we saw a lot of smoke come up. And now the smoke has pretty much gone off to the side, going towards the east side of Manhattan.
The second building collapsed. Came out 20 minutes later, looking like a Three Stooges movie covered in plastic. I swear to God. What do you got a good thing, man? That's some good shit. Then we went back there. Whoa, 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 whoa!
What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol.
People in our newsroom have been saying today what's happening is like right out of a Tom Clancy novel.
In that attack. I'm joined on the phone now by Tom Clancy, who is a real authority on American security, and of course one of the world's best-known authors of terrorist attacks in fictional form. He once wrote a book called Debt of Honor that ended with a 747 crashing into the U.S. Capitol. Tom, it turns out that truth is much stranger and much more devastating than fiction.
Well, Tom, it always is. And, you know, one of the problems with being a writer of fiction is keeping up with all the perversity of the real world. It's just a horrible event. And, you know, it's all, you know, we're talking over 10,000 American dead, and that's about as bad as it gets.
When you first heard these reports today of hijacked planes being flown into the Twin Trade Towers and into the Pentagon, what was your initial reaction?
You know, I wouldn't have written this into a novel because I would not have regarded it as a credible threat. 4 people willing to give their lives up for their cause in a period of a few hours. That's not very. It's just hard to grasp. It's hard to wrap your mind around something like that.
Well, the other thing that we have to say is that this was a very efficient, in a cold-blooded fashion, and a very sophisticated and a very complex operation that didn't happen in just the last 48 hours or so.
Well, obviously, there were some months or weeks or months or potentially even years of preparation went into this. I mean, pardon me for putting it this way, but it was a beautifully planned operation. It just, you know, Pearl Harbor achieved tactical surprise and achieved the objective of the Japanese Navy, so this operation achieved the objective of its perpetrators.
We want to put on the screen now, Tom, and have you watch it at home as well. This is the tracking that we had earlier today of these airliners that took off from Boston's Logan Field. And as you can see, it was very shortly after takeoff that they make a hard left turn and head for New York Harbor and the World Trade Center. We were told that they were armed with knives, but this hijacking all happened very quickly.
Yeah, I'm looking at the radar track now. It's somewhat surprising that the air traffic control system wasn't alerted by this, but I don't know I'm not a pilot. I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Well, one of the things that happened apparently is that the hijackers were so sophisticated they knew to turn off the transponders. So they had this kind of a track on them, but they didn't have the radar track that they would normally have, or the radio traffic that they would have with the air traffic controllers.
Well, that'd be one explanation of it, I guess. But again, I'm not an airline pilot. I don't know the ins and outs of that system. I really can't comment on it intelligently.
You do know a lot about the perils that exist in the modern world and the high technology that is available to just about everyone out there. You think that there's a full appreciation, certainly there may be by the end of this day, a full appreciation across America, even in the highest echelons of our government and our corporate life, of the real threat of terrorism?
Well, certainly this event has brought things pretty close to home for everybody. I mean, we've got, again, more than 10,000 Americans have probably lost their lives today. And that's 10,000 families who have learned the hard way that terrorism is quite real.
Give you any pause about writing additional fiction about terrorist attacks?
No, I have no such plans. But yeah, I'm not going to. You don't try to make money off things like that. It just isn't ethical.
All right, Tom Clancy, thank you very much for being with us.
The second movie came out 20 minutes later, looking like a Three Stooges movie covered with plastic, I swear to God. But you got a good thing, that's a good shit. Then we went back there. Whoa, 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 whoa!
Sorry, these are pictures from this. Tell me what I'm looking at. I think I'm looking at pictures from this morning. Yeah, these are pictures from this morning. And that gives you some sense of the scope of what has to be dealt with in terms of rubble that is down in the World Trade Center. Still, there's problem with fire. John Miller was pointing out that some of the debris from the collapsed building, even though it's been almost 22 hours, 23 hours since the building's actually collapsed, some of the debris still blew up this morning onto the roof of a building in Battery City Park. That building caught fire. Firemen had to deal with that blaze. An already overstretched fire department in New York had to deal with it and did so. But that's the scene this morning in New York City with this pile of rubble, steel, concrete, a crime scene, but 6 stories tall, 6 stories of rubble.
I mean, pardon me for putting it this way, but it was a beautifully planned operation. It just, Pearl Harbor
achieved tactical surprise and achieved the objective of the Japanese Navy. So this operation achieved the objective of its perpetrators.